Hey, I'm Madonna Guy, and this is David Shield from New Leaf Natural Therapies. This is part 2 of our little mental health thingamajig today. So I want to talk about brain parts because I think it's really powerful for people to understand why things like breathing, why things like counselling, why things like nutrients are so powerful in order to get our brain back up and running. So imagine your brain having a big connection between the left and right hemisphere of the brain. That's your corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is about 1 centimetre wide and it connects the two hemispheres of the brain. So the left side of the brain is your logical hemisphere, the right side of the brain is your gestalt or creative.
What do you know what gestalt means?
Big picture.
Big picture.
Yeah, so it's big picture. So basically, when we are having an anxiety attack, for example, we have less than 30% connections across our corpus callosum. So when we're having a panic attack, we've got less than 10% connection between the corpus callosum. So just even those numbers, alone make you go, okay, so why am I running? Because how many people are running on anxiety all the time? Their brain constantly feels on edge. They're constantly double guessing themselves. Their heart's constantly pounding, which of course is allow you to run away from the tiger. So when we're sort of thinking about that brain and the fact that there's this connection that's supposed to be running across that corpus callosum all day, every day, it's like your fast electricity moving through your brain.
People with some spectrum disorders, ADHD I know about, there's a lot less integration between the sides.
Exactly.
1 to 1.5 up to 2 times. Some depends on the studies, but the lack
1 to 2 times less integration than other people. That
Yes.
makes sense. Absolutely.
From the normal spectrum. So
Yeah.
they have a real deficit in that, interconnecting that part of the brain, but also interconnecting to the top part of the brain.
Yes. So that's the next little part of it. Thank you, David. Is that front? So now imagine that this part of our brain, the conscious part, is this little guy up here, and then imagine this down here. This is our unconscious area. So basically, the conscious pathways in the brain, estimates are anywhere from say 3 to 10% of the brain is in that conscious pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Which
more...
is called the prefrontal area.
Yeah, so basically the anterior commissure, there's all these little neurons that come out into this area.
Prefrontal cortex.
Well, the anterior commissure is the nerves to all that area, and basically, guess what happens if that area shuts down?
The brain becomes disintegrated.
The brain becomes disintegrated.
Because the frontal area integrates the rest of the brain.
Yes. So in the midbrain, we've got these delightful little things called amygdala. So they're about the size of almonds. They're sort of in the midbrain, and they connect the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And the amygdala are where the things like fight and flight, rage and anger, escape, submission, freeze, switching off our pleasure reward centers, and pain and punishment.
Panicking.
Yeah, that's part of anxiety and fear and anxiety. So when our amygdala, we have 1/500th of a second under stress before our amygdala kicks into action. 1/500th of a second. So if we don't have really good corpus callosum function, then we can't get from left to right hemispheres of the brain for our little amygdala, then we can whip into old patterns and it makes us feel like a 5-year-old attacking our big brother instantly.
Right.
It doesn't take very long at all, which is why when we have children come and see us with any of these neurospicy conditions, you need to let the parents know it's not the kid's fault. Even as adults, it's not our fault, but hey, we should have done something about it by the time we're, misbehaving our whole lifetimes.
It's not the kid's fault because symptoms are generally automatic.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
automatic means they're beyond the self-control.
Yes.
So even though something like ADHD is described as it's a bit of a brain morphing that leads to a lack of self-control.
I call it a brain fart.
Right. but it's that thing that other people have more self-control and they automatically have less.
Yes.
And that's because they have trouble getting the nerve energy up to this part of the brain.
Yes. Now, one of the things about the logical hemisphere of the brain is that that's where things like, and this is all morphed, of course, it's all interchangeable, but logic is where mostly the maths happens, the science happens, real science, you know, that sort of happens over here. The gestalt is where art happens, music happens, creativity happens. But in order for anything to happen in life, we need a really good combination of both, which is why so many kids, you know, if they're having issues with maths, to go and learn piano or guitar is really good for their maths. Because the maths isn't just in the logical hemisphere of the brain. So once again, I know it's getting a bit messy, actually. Let's just flip it. What's that? Is that maths or is that art that we have put measurements into our brain to make that happen as maths? The symbols are in the right hemisphere of the brain. The maths is in the left hemisphere of the brain. So for us to do well at maths and to get it quickly, we need good corpus callosum connection. Right. Which is why doing anything with that left-right brain, it's why, you know, getting kids to march. When we were at school, we would used to march out on the oval. Marching integrates the brain. Cross-crawl integrates the brain. You know, getting kids to do things that are very much left-right sides of the brain.
And that's everything musical, everything creative, they help integrate all parts of the brain. Because they move from, because you're using both things to do it. Whether that's music, dancing for ADHD, they found to be really, really helpful. So anything that's...
yoga and that sort of thing.
Yoga's
whole body stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so that is art or symbols that have to communicate with the logical hemisphere of the brain in order to make maths happen. So once again, people who have that connection going on are going to have an easier time with English, an easier time with maths, an easier time at school. Now, that may not necessarily be the best thing on the planet because we also need to have that skeptical brain. Any good scientist is going to be skeptical as part of their nature. If we've always had everything come really, really easy to us, if we read a textbook and just get it, we might simply believe it. So I sort of always think that the good thing about people who are ADHD or neurospicy or on the spectrum is that their brain doesn't work as easily, so therefore they often have extra skills in other areas because they haven't had an easy time. Their teachers picked on them, their parents have picked on them, they've had to come up with other solutions.
And so that really important note about that is that it's because they're so dysregulated, they tend to be pulled up by a teacher 20 times more than a normal student.
Yeah.
Told to pay attention, and so that leaves a residue of hurt often, feeling being treated different from the other students, and it also happens at home. Spectrum kids are often treated differently from their other siblings until one finds out what's going on.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. There's like a success cycle that some people go through when everything's easy. You get complimented all the time. You know, your teachers love you because, you know, you're a good kid. You sit there, you do your work. But then we also have a pain cycle. So, you know, when you're in trouble all of the time. This one increases all our feel-good hormones because you know you can do stuff. This one decreases our feel-good hormones because we know we can't do stuff. As soon as this goes on, then what ends up happening back at our conscious, unconscious and subconscious part of the brain. So this is our conscious area. This is our unconscious part of the brain back through the rear of the brain. So this little area down here, that's where sleep happens, it's where digestion happens, it's where heartbeat happens, respiratory function happens. So this part of the brain, we end up storing stress patterns that are there 100% of the time.
Which part's that?
The unconscious.
Right. And that's actually...
It's the lizard brain.
In the brain stem.
Yeah. And the reticular, whereas the one that most videos out there are talking about when they're talking about affirmations and positive thinking and all that sort of stuff, that happens in here. That's 70% of the brain. That's your subconscious brain. Absolutely, that's good to share.
Because this stuff down here is unconscious because you don't notice it going on. Like, because it regulates things like your heartbeat or your blinking.
But also, at some stage, your nervous system has told you that life is always going to be dangerous. That's why. No, not you personally. But that's why we put these patterns there. Your brain doesn't want to ever do the same job twice if it can get away with it. So what it ends up doing is laying down these unconscious patterns in the unconscious pathway of the brain in our lizard brain, so that it's there 100% of the time.
But the good patterns are there too, aren't they?
No, they're not in here.
Where does the one where the automated part where you say the automated bits where you're driving?
Oh, that's the basal ganglia and
Medial,
putamen. No, that's basal ganglia. It's close. You know, there's
Yeah,
sort of
it's
more
down the
here.
bottom side.
Yeah, but it's down there, but it's not this. It's not driving
Oh,
this.
okay.
Yeah, it's actually above the reticular activating system and the unconscious patterning. So the basal, I always joke about the putamen. So the putamen is a part of the brain that stores a lot of things to do with sport, you know, like putting in golf.
Right.
Haha, sorry. So the putamen, the basal ganglia, they store a whole bunch of automatic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, with kids, remember, the neurospicy were different about 20 years ago. Remember all the kids who used to sit there with their, you know, toys and they'd, you know, spin the wheels, you know, for 6-8 hours a day. I would have kids come into my clinic, you know, and they would just touch everything and feel it. Like it feels different to what it is today. I think there's more environmental stuff going on that's messing with different parts of the brain. But that part of the brain is the basal ganglia. Now, funnily enough, there was a study done about 20 years ago now where they looked at children who had died, all sorts of reasons, you know, nothing, you know, just kids who had died, who were on the spectrum and from 0 to 18 years old, and they sliced the brain through and trying to find where there was something, they were looking for some sort of pattern that with these neurospicy kids there was something going on. All of the kids, all of them, had staph or strep stored in the basal ganglia in their brain. So, and back then, 20 years ago, it was believed that infections couldn't cross the blood-brain barrier to a certain extent, whereas now we know that infections, when our immune system is actually trying to kill off infections, it can break the bugs apart into 10 to 30 pieces. Those parts can be up to 30 times more inflammatory than the bug as a whole. Those are nano-sized and can cross the blood-brain barrier.
Psychoactive drugs across the blood-brain barrier.
Yes, they coat them with all sorts of fun stuff like lipopolysaccharides and...
That's the nature of them. They're things that cross, all drugs do. They actually cross the blood.
And the ethyl mercury and ethyl aluminium that's in a lot of medications, including a lot of the injections, have been well known to cross blood-brain barrier for 20 plus years.
But also the drugs they use for entertainment, for whatever.
Entertainment,
pain relief. No, but you know, like addiction problems, they're also crossing the blood-brain barrier, and they're going into the brain system and working with the neuroreceptors. So they also go across the blood-brain barrier. Yeah. So I sort of, you know, really the unconscious stuff I find really fascinating because, you know, if you've watched my YouTube videos, you'll know that I work with this all the time. And for me, it's really fantastic when people stop having these patterns running their unconscious part of the brain, everything gets easier in life. You know, it's like doing positive holistic counselling with people and everything in their life starts improving, even though they really only wanted to talk about ABC. Because, you know, when you shift one thing big, it can change everything. It can make you feel more positive and more dynamic and more switched on and more empowered. Well, the Therapeutic CBT does that. They look for those, because the original thing in the basis of modern psychology with Sigmund Freud, they worked out that there were all these adaptations that lived in the unconscious, things that they adapted to survive at kids at school or at home, and you can correct them logically. It doesn't have, like CBT is not a really, it doesn't have, often it's short lasting, but just getting some relief from that unconscious push can be such a relief.
Yeah. So I hope that was sort of interesting, a bit of a brain physiology. The next one we're going to do is about some specific toxins in foods as well as some nutrients that might be able to help us.
Okay, thank you, Brains.
Thanks, Brains Trust.